morning. My name is Christina Felchlin, Support Manager at Ledgeview Partners. I'd like to welcome you to this month's Ledgeview CRM User Group webinar. Our highlighted topic for today is workflows. We have a lot to cover today between our highlighted topic and the pre-submitted questions, so we're going to get right to the agenda. We're going to start off our webinar with our highlighted topic, workflows. We'll go over the basics, let you know the elements and best practices of workflows, give you a few workflow ideas you can create yourself or contact Ledgeview to create for you. Then we will give you some ideas to troubleshoot your workflow issues and answer your pre-submitted questions. I will then close today's webinar with letting you know of resources and upcoming webinars. On to the housekeeping items. To ensure the best audio quality for all attendees, we have everyone in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please submit those in the question pane of your GoToWebinar control panel. I know we typically don't have much time for questions, but we'd still love to hear from you during today's presentation. If time does not permit, we'll promise to follow up offline. Lastly, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand after the live session. All registered attendees will receive an email this afternoon with an access link to the recording as well as the presentation slide. Now let's get to the content. I am pleased to bring back Michael Dodds, Support Consultant with Ledgeview.
Thank you, Christina, for that wonderful introduction. And yes, everyone, this is Michael Dodds, not a frog impersonating him. I apologize for the cold. But without further ado, let's get to workflows before our time croaks. We're going to start off with workflow basics. We're going to start off with types of processes. Types of processes that we have are workflows, which is the most commonly used one, which updates records, can send emails, create records, assign records. It can do a whole host of items and is a very, very valuable tool. A less commonly used but still very effective process is actions. It creates a new operation or combines operations into a function. So if you are looking to assign or to create a record and assign it all at the same time, you can create that as an action and it will perform both operations. Business process flow. It's a visual flow chart from an entity. The most common places you're going to see this is in leads and opportunities. It's that upward bar where you move to the next stage. It's a very helpful visual tool. And lastly is dialogue, which is the least common. Dialogue is an interactive step-by-step data entry form for your users, meaning it's a pop-up box essentially, where it requires your users to interact with it to move on. Speaking of dialogues, let's kind of compare those between workflows. So a workflow can be either started by a user or automated. An on-demand function allows it to be started by a user. Where a dialog box you can't start automatically. Has to be initiated by a user. Workflows can be either background or real-time processes, which we will touch on the next slide, and they do not require user input to run to completion, meaning once they run, the user's out of it, and sometimes the user isn't even involved. However, with the dialog box, it's real-time, and the user has to be inputting information for it to run to completion. Triggers, which is what causes a workflow to run, are supported in a workflow. Triggers do not work for dialogues. Now, I mentioned in the previous slide real-time workflows versus background workflows. Real-time workflows, they run in a single process, meaning they create their own process and the workflow has to run start to finish before the next one can be triggered. We're in a background workflow. It's set into an asynchronous process, which means other instances can trigger because they're all sent to this asynchronous process and they can finish simultaneously. Because of this, real-time workflows can roll back changes if it fails, but a background workflow cannot because it's already committed the database to it. A real-time workflow, however, does require more system resources, so it takes up more system responsiveness if you're using a lot of them. And background workflows require less system resources. Now, many of you, if you've talked to us here at Ledgeview Partners, have probably heard us say workflow or plugin. Now, the main difference between a workflow plugin and when to use them is a plugin is essentially using business logic like a workflow does, but it has a little bit more customization and capabilities to it. But the only time you really want to use a plugin is if it's being created or maintained by a developer. If you're a non-developer looking to create business logic or maintain it, workflow is the way to go. or if you want to trigger something manually, an on-demand workflow is the way to go there. Next, we're going to jump into a workflow, which is essentially the meat and potatoes. Triggers. This is what causes a workflow to activate, essentially. So it can be triggered when a record is created. So if a lead is created, it can fire off a workflow. The status changes. If you close an opportunity, you can kick off a workflow. When you assign a record to another user, when you delete it, for example, if you delete an opportunity, if it auto-populated another record, you can run a workflow to clear that information out. Or a specific field is changed. So if any field in the entity you're working in for that workflow is changed, if you choose that, it can trigger a workflow. Now for scope, scope is essentially like the security settings. There's user, business unit, parent-child business unit, and organization. If you set the scope to user, that means only that user can use it. It cannot be done across the organization. We highly, highly recommend, it's the best practice, to set the scope to organization. Otherwise, you can run into issues where a workflow will not run. There could be times where you have different business units, and that is the right business logic and design to set it to business unit. Now, the components of a workflow. Stage, it's a nice way of saying you can split a workflow into manageable sections. Essentially what it's doing is you're taking a very large workflow and you can split it into different manageable sections. A check condition, that's essentially an if-then statement. You're saying if certain criteria are met, then create this action or do this action. A conditional branch is kind of an add-on to a check condition. It can only be done when there's a check condition in place. And it adds what's called an otherwise if. So if you have if this, then do this, you can create an otherwise statement in there. So otherwise, if it doesn't do those things, you can trigger another action to take place. It's a little confusing, but we're actually going to touch on this a little bit later. A default action, if your check condition or your conditional branch ever failed, this is the default action that takes place. Parallel wait branch, very, very uncommonly used component, but what it does is the wait condition that runs in parallel to your original workflow. Now, a wait condition is very, very common. If you ever run a workflow, trigger a workflow, but you want it to wait 24 hours before it does the action, that's what a wait condition is. So if you trigger it off of a lead being created, you'll have to wait 24 hours before sending an email. A workflow can also create a record, any type of record. It can update any related record. It can assign a record to another user. It can send an email. It can start a child workflow. A child workflow is usually, it's used to perform a task outside the original selected entity. We're going to touch on this in a question a little bit later on. You can change the status. So you can change the status of an entity to won or lost, or from qualified to open. And then you can simply stop as succeeded or canceled. And then the actions of a workflow. The action of a workflow is basically taking those components and implementing them with your conditions and actually creating the workflow. Next, we're going to cover some workflow ideas that are very, very handy for many organizations. We're starting from some of the easier ones to more complicated ones. A couple workflow ideas with emails is automatically notifying a sales manager when an opportunity is won or lost. You can also notify a sales manager when an opportunity's estimated revenue exceeds a certain dollar amount. So if as a company you have a business process in place that says if it's over $500, I want my sales manager to know, as they want to keep a special eye on it. You can send them a note so they don't have to go and look for these. You can auto-populate fields in a record from other entities. So you can update a record and populate that with information from an opportunity to a lead, things like that. You can also notify a sales rep when a lead has been assigned to them. You can generate activities. So if a sales rep receives a lead or an opportunity, you can set activities for them for 1 week out, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out. That way, that sales rep doesn't have to go in and manually create them. You can auto-assign a record. If an opportunity goes above a certain amount, you can auto-assign that to a different user. You can auto-close a record. For example, if you're working in the service industry and you have a case that's been open for 2 weeks, once it hits that 2-week mark, you can automatically close that record. You can set reminders on opportunities based on conditional items. So when it hits a revenue, a sales stage, time the opportunity's been open, you can send reminders to your sales reps. You can also request approval. In quotes, sometimes a quote is discounted a certain amount, and once it hits that specific percentage, you can send a request or put it into a holding stage and send a request to your manager for approval. You can update a specific record with specific information if it meets a specific criteria. Then update the record with a different set of information based on a different set of criteria. That's that conditional branch. We're going to touch on that in one of our demos. Now on to best practices. Thrown a lot of information out at you, and this is really the best practice section. What we highly recommend from CRM. Running a workflow is a background process unless it's absolutely necessary to be real time. Your system will generally function better. There's a box under workflow job retention. As you can see in this little screenshot, it says automatically delete completed workflow jobs. Highly recommend unchecking that box because as we touch on in troubleshooting, if that box is checked, you're not going to be able to do much troubleshooting. Set the scope to organization. As we touched on earlier, that's usually the process. Sometimes it will call for it to be business unit or even user if that is what applies, but organization is usually the best way to go. Only check as an on-demand workflow if you want users to be able to manually trigger them. And when actually creating the workflow, understand the scenarios and write down all the possible scenarios that could happen. Then ensure that the workflow covers each scenario. And finally, once you're done creating the workflow, ensure everything runs accurately. Test it. Try different scenarios. Make sure everything is doing and functioning correctly. Troubleshooting of workflows. One of the most difficult or frustrating things to be stuck in is what's called an infinite loop. What's nice is it will not allow you to actually create the workflow. It will tell you that you're in an infinite loop. But what this means is that your workflow is stuck in a never-ending cycle. An example of this would be if your workflow is triggered by a lead being created, and then that workflow creates a new lead. Once that new lead is created, it's going to kick off the workflow again, create another workflow, and then trigger the workflow again. So you're stuck in a never-ending loop. You can never get out of it. Checking workflow status. This comes back to the point of making sure that box is unchecked about deleting the jobs automatically. This allows you to go in and check the status of a workflow. Very key place to start. If you go into the workflow, there's a section about the process sessions. This will tell you different statuses, whether it's succeeded, failed, or is waiting. Succeeded is obviously a good thing, but if for some reason the email didn't go out but the workflow succeeded, you know you're having an issue with the email, not the workflow. Failed, it will give you an error message as to why the actual workflow failed. And if it's waiting, if you put in a wait condition, it might still be in the wait condition. That's why it hasn't completed its firing. Those are the main steps you want to take when troubleshooting a workflow. Next, we're going to jump into CRM and we're actually going to process a demo for a workflow. Our first demo is going to be creating a phone call task for your sales rep when a lead is assigned to them. We're going to put an if statement on this that says if the phone call is generated and the lead owner is the user marketing, we're not going to want to complete this task or create this task. The phone call activity is going to be due 3 days after the workflow fires. And because the workflow will be triggered by the creation of a lead, it'll be due 3 days after the assignment of the lead. It'll be due 3 days after the lead is assigned. The phone number will be the lead's business phone. The regarding field will be the lead. Our call will be from the lead owner, so the person that owns that lead. And the actual call will be placed to the lead. We're going to set the owner of our phone call to lead owner. And then we're going to set a specific description and subject field. Call new lead and dash that, and then actually the name of the lead. The reason I'm telling you this information is because we're going to dynamically set all of this information. So no matter what record is being pulled or what lead is going off of, it's going to create this dynamically to the correct lead with correct information. So we're going to pull over our CRM, and we'll go from our main drop down. We're going to go to Settings, Processes, and then we're going to click on New. It asks for a process name. Usually what I do is I set it as test until I know it's working correctly, and then I will give it a name. And then our category is workflow, and our entity will be lead. We're creating a phone call activity, but our workflow is being generated or triggered by a lead being assigned. We want this to be run in the background, and it's a new blank process. So we're going to click OK. And in our steps here, we're going to make sure our scope is organization, and we're going to uncheck automatically delete completed workflow jobs. We're not starting when the record is created, but we are kicking it off when the record is assigned. So we are going to set a check condition. So if we go down to Add Step and do Check Condition, our if statement, if we click on the condition portion, is if the lead owner does not equal marketing. So this is saying if the lead owner does not equal marketing, save and close, then we're going to run this action step. And our action step is going to be to create a record. And under here, under Create Record, we're going to set this as Phone Call. And then we're going to click Set Properties. And our subject line, as we said, is going to be Call, New Lead, and it's going to be dash lead. Now this over here on the right-hand side are dynamic values. We're looking for the lead, and then the field is the lead. So essentially what that means is the lead name is what's going to populate in here. So we click Add. I'm going to click back into our subject and click OK. And now it's going to, this is a dynamic field. Our call from, as we said, is going to be from the lead owner. So we go here again, look for, and our secondary field is going to be owner. Click Add, and add it right to the call from. Our call to is again going to be to the lead. So we set this to lead, click OK. Our phone number is going to be the business phone. If it's not entered, if there's no business phone number on the lead, it's not going to appear here. So it's very important to make sure you have complete data when entering your records. So we go down to business phone, click Add, click OK. And again, our description is going to be Call New Lead, and then set this to lead. And then click OK. Regarding is it's going to regard that lead. So this phone call activity is going to be associated to lead, which is exactly what we want it to be. The owner of this phone call is going to be the owner of the lead. We want it to match. So we're going to click Add and OK. Now here's the more complicated portion, this do section. We want to make 3 days after this workflow fires. So under day, we're going to click down to 3, set this to after. And here's where we make a major change. We are looking at the process. So if we go down to local values process, it's execution time. So from the time this process executes, 3 days later, it will be due. Click Add and click OK. And click Save and Close. Now we have our workflow created. Key step, you always have to activate your workflow before it will actually process and fire. So we click activate. Now whenever our new lead is assigned, this workflow will trigger. Now if we go back to our demo, our second demo is actually going to be a little bit more complicated. Our second demo is if a quote is activated and the quote is over $500,000 in value, we're going to update an opportunity's estimated revenue with that quote total amount, place the opportunity in a specific stage, the manager approval stage, and then we're going to send an email to the manager with quote activation date, the opportunity's estimated close date, estimated revenue, owner, and account name. So these are three really specific items that can take a user a long time to create, and it's going to do this automatically, and it will only take 10 minutes. It takes approximately 10 minutes for myself to create this, so in overall 30 minutes of work to save your users a ton of time. But along with this, we're going to add this otherwise statement. So otherwise, if the quote is activated as well, but the quote is under $500,000, all we're going to do is update the opportunity with the estimated revenue with that quote total amount, and then update the stage to propose. Thus, for any reason you have a quote that was over $500,000, and then at any point you need to revise that quote and drop it under $500,000, what it will do, it'll change the dollar amount, but it will also change that stage from manager approval back to propose. So we're going to jump into CRM, and I'm going to show you exactly what that workflow would look like. So again, we're triggering this off of the quote entity when a record status has changed. So when it's activated, that's when we want this to kick off. So what it's saying is if the quote status equals active and the quote total amount field is over $500,000, we're going to update our opportunity. And it's going to update our stage to manager approval, and it's going to update our estimated revenue with the quote total amount. Then it's also going to create and send a new email message with dynamic fields, just like we did in the phone call activity. So it's going to come from the owner of the opportunity to the sales manager, Christina, and it's going to say, hey, this opportunity is over $500,000 and it needs approval. It's going to say hello to Christina, and then a quote was activated for this for over $500,000 in estimated revenue. Here's your key pieces of information. It's simply asking for an approval. Now, if for any reason this is actually under $500,000, it's just going to simply update the opportunity to the sales stage of propose and put in that quote total amount. So if it's $495,000, that's what will appear in there. It will all be done automatically. No extra work needs to be done by your user. That's all we have for our workflows. We're actually going to move on to some user questions now. Our first user question is, what are some best practices for when you use child processes within workflows and dialogues? This is an excellent question. And I want to start off by saying a child workflow is best used when you can combine the smaller steps in a workflow and make it a sub-process that you can reuse. So if you have multiple steps that are consistently reused, make that a sub-process called a child workflow, and you can reuse them. Some key times you're going to want to use this is if, regarding the dialogue section, if you ever need to do a wait condition, you cannot do a wait step in a dialogue. So instead of doing a dialog box, you can simply set up a child workflow which can wait before performing that action instead of making your users wait. If you have a workflow that has redundant items, so creating an activity, for instance, you can build that activity in a child workflow, and then every time you're going to create that activity, you just call the child workflow. Instead of recreating those dynamic steps that I showed you in the phone call, so instead of having to do that over and over again, you can just do the child workflow. A very similar situation is if you have similar workflows being triggered by different events. So if field updates, if a record is created when it's assigned, you can have different triggers, and then call the child workflow for each trigger method. The last very commonly used one is when you have a long wait time in the middle of a workflow. So for instance, if you called a customer, you triggered a workflow and created a phone call activity, and then you want to follow up 11 months from now. So you set up the workflow to trigger and performs the action. Then you set a wait time. You want to wait those 11 months before creating a follow-up. Just have a child workflow complete the follow-up items instead of making that one workflow stay open. Our next question is, how do you autofill from an account page to create opportunity and to the opportunity page itself? This is a great question. This can be achieved through data mapping. But one thing to note before actually creating the data mapping, you want to make sure that the fields of the account page or account form are identical to the opportunity and opportunity quick create form. So if you have an option set, you want to make sure you have the same option set in the opportunity form and the opportunity quick create form. If they're different in any way, the data mapping will not work. Same goes for a single text line field. If one is 999 words, the other one's 1,000, it can fail. You want to make sure they're exactly identical. Once you've done this, then you can create the data mapping. The way to do this is you want to navigate to the Customize the System section, click on Account, and then there's a one-to-many relationship, which is one-to-n relationship. There's going to be an account to opportunity relationship. Open that up, click on Mappings. It'll be on the left-hand side. Make sure there are no current data mappings that utilize either the account form field or the opportunity form field. Click New, and then on the left-hand side there will be a source entity list. Find the field on the account form. In that source entity list, check mark it. And then on the right-hand side will be the target entity list, which will be the opportunity form. Find that field, check mark it. At the end of each list, it'll say the data type for that field. And if one says option set and the other one says option set, you're good to go. Then just simply click OK and then publish your customization. I apologize for that being cut off down there. Our last one for the day is I would like to understand how to use the knowledge base, the best practices and processes. I'm going to touch on a quick demo of how to create a new knowledge article. I'm going to touch base on the best practices first. There are different article templates that you can use. If you find that you're needing to modify an existing template, create new article template as needed. Same thing, and also for subjects, there are different subjects that you can associate to the knowledge article. If the subjects don't fit, create a new subject. Their section is not a required field in the article entity, but I highly recommend entering it. That way users can search for that keyword and find articles. So once it's grown and you have hundreds or thousands of workflows, it makes it easier, or not workflows, excuse me, knowledge articles, you can search for them. And then once an article is submitted, it must be approved. Highly recommend determining someone in your organization who should approve articles. And this is done through the appropriate security settings in the service section. Set up a workflow to notify the individuals that approves knowledge-based articles of the new article. I highly recommend this because, again, I'm a huge fan of workflows. I think they save so much time and energy and wasted work. And this can be done by alerting this person instead of them having to go and find any new ones that need to be published. If you ever reject an article, provide a reason. This will help the originator of the article to make adjustments so it can be approved. Finally, creating a dashboard showing the number of articles created by week by rep. If you are doing a major push to get your reps to put in more knowledge articles. Creating a dashboard to see who is and isn't creating articles will help you as a manager to grow your article base. So we're going to jump back into CRM and I will show you how to create a knowledge article. So from our drop down box, we're going to go to service and then we're going to go to articles. So from articles, we're going to click on new. And then this will just pop up here. It'll take a minute to generate because it's a pop-up box that comes up. This is a dialog box actually. So here are your various different templates. So questions and answer is the one we're going to go with. So we're going to click OK. And it's going to pop up another dialog box for us. I'm going to expand this. So in here it's going to say instructions state the question. So our question is, where are articles located? And then instructions for answer, provide the answer to the question in the service end. And then you can provide additional instructions or comments. Great article. Now your title, we're just going to name this KB article. Your subject. So these are the various subjects that you have. You have a default subject, queries, so information and products, and then service. So ours is information, and click select. And keywords. Our keyword is going to be article. That way they can search article and find this knowledge base article. And then we simply click save and close. This will then appear in draft articles. I would have the approval through my user. I have the ability to approve this. So if I decide that I want to, I apologize, I did not actually submit this yet. So I need to click the submit button. And once it's submitted and you go to review this, the person that actually makes the decision to approve these will go into the knowledge article and click approve or reject. So if you click approve, we'll approve it and it is now published. We'll move out of draft articles, and if we go to publish articles, it is now appearing in here, KB article.
All right. As always, Michael, thank you for that great content. Sorry we ran over on time today. Just want to go through a couple more things with you guys. Resources. Reminder that we have all the previous user group webinars in our on-demand library. If you want to implement something we discussed in a previous webinar but can't remember exactly what we showed you, visit the link in the email you received this afternoon and it'll take you right to the user group library. There you can find all the previous month's webinars and view them at your leisure. To date, we have covered advanced buying, sales processes, dashboards, marketing, reports, activities, and the Outlook client. Another great resource is your support team at Ledgeview. If you run into an error, have a question or issue, feel free to reach out to the Ledgeview support team at crmsupport@ledgeviewpartners.com or their phone at 920-560-6888. Time spent working with them on an issue would be billed to your ad hoc or a comprehensive support agreement. With the holiday weekend coming up, we want to remind everybody that our offices will be closed on Monday, July 4th for the Independence Day holiday. Next webinars. Our next CRM user group webinar will be on Tuesday, July 19th. We know one of the hardest hurdles organizations face with CRM is user adoption. We'll give you some tips and tricks to help you and your colleagues with CRM adoption. On Thursday, July 21st, we'll have a webinar called Automating Field Service Through Work Orders and Mobile. In this webinar and live demo, see how you transform your field service experience with a closed loop work order lifecycling, including work order automation, scheduling and dispatching, real-time mobile communications to the field technician, proper oversight and communications with field service employees to keep your operations cost in check while you grow your business organically, central control and people management for the competitive advantage you need to survive where services are quickly becoming commoditized. Then on July 27th, we'll present a webinar on the ABCs of Microsoft Dynamics CRM, learn how to acquire leads, build relationships, and close deals. We'll show you how marketing, sales, and service work together by utilizing Microsoft Dynamics CRM to create a customer journey that will maximize efficiency, productivity, and profitability. Then on Thursday, July 28th, join us for 5 strategies to better segment your segment your current lead database. There isn't a one-size-fits-all customer. Customers of today expect personalized experiences because they have different problems and needs and are looking for you to offer solutions to their issues. In order to offer this type of experience, you need to first segment your potential customers into groups or lists so that you can tailor your messaging. This webinar will focus on ways to segment your lead database, including segmentation by sales stage, buyer persona, behavioral attributes, and lead score. All webinars are recorded and available on demand. If you register after the live webinar date, you will immediately have access to the on-demand recording. To register, visit ledgeviewpartners.com, click on the News and Events link, and scroll to the webinar section. On behalf of Michael and I and all of us at Ledgeview Partners, we'd like to thank you for spending time with us today. Have a great rest of your day.